Well, hello everyone and welcome. I'm John Britt from the WSPHA Professional Development Committee, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. This webinar is presented by the Washington State Public Health Association, your statewide professional association dedicated to public health leadership, professional development, and advocacy. We very much appreciate your interest and attendance today and hope that if you've not already done so, you'll join or renew your membership in WSPHA to protect and enhance the health of Washington State and to support the public health profession. We're going to get started in just a minute, but first I'm going to ask Betsy to orient us to the go-to software so we can all participate effectively in today's webinar. Betsy?
Okay, firstly, for the best quality possible at your computer, please exit from all other applications because they can interfere with the advancement of the presentation. This slide shows you the control panel. As indicated at the beginning of the webinar, everyone is joined in a muted fashion. If you would like to submit a question, you can do so through the questions box at the bottom of your control panel. And you are connected to the webinar. You can connect to the webinar either via the telephone or the microphone on your computer. If you are using the microphone on your computer and you do experience any sort of echo or other audio problems, you can switch to the telephone during the presentation just by clicking on the button and following the directions that it provides. The webinar will be recorded today, and the slides and the recording will be available on our website. John?
Okay, thank you, Betsy. It's my pleasure today to introduce Joseph Peters, one of the founding partners of Ascentum, and Joe will tell you a bit more about Ascentum in just a moment. He and his partners help organizations build sustainable decisions to very complex issues through public participation and often incorporate social media and other interactive technology into their designs. Joe's an advisor to the Deliberative Democracy Consortium and is also a founding board member of the Canadian Community for Dialogue and Deliberation. Just as a point of information, I want to let you all know that Joe consulted with my former employer, the Tacoma-Pierce County Health Department, last year to help us develop a public participation process for our upcoming Community Health Improvement Plan. I'm quite grateful to Joe for his offer to spend some time with us today pro bono, and I'm looking forward to learning more about how we in public health can increase our ability to involve the public in the important public health decisions. Joe, welcome.
Thanks, John. Betsy, could you move it to the second slide, please? So just to give you a little bit of a rundown about us at Ascentum, we really focus on three things. We do public participation, employee engagement, stakeholder relations, and we do that through our 20 full-time staff. And since we opened our doors in 2003, we've now completed over 200 different initiatives. Next slide, please. And maybe I'll just, one technical thing, I think, Betsy, in terms of questions, when they come in, we'll answer those questions as they come up on a slide-by-slide basis. So in terms of our approach, we look at what the complementary mix in our engagement initiatives between in-person participation, online participation, and we make a distinction between online participation and social media participation. And so because each initiative and each target audience and each issue that you're dealing with is different, we don't find that there's one best way or only one route to engaging people. So we look at what the most complementary approach is in mixing these different approaches and techniques for engagement. So we really feel the value of face-to-face dialogue can never be fully replaced. Well, at least at this point in time, we haven't seen a technology that gives you the same results that you would have from a face-to-face dialogue. With online participation, really that allows for things at a greater scale than you can normally accommodate in in-person events, although there are some exceptions and some approaches that allow for large numbers. And then with social media, the opportunities there are to engage people in their social networks and where they are. Instead of having to try and get people to come to you, you have the ability to reach out to them and build relationships leveraging social media. Next slide, please. So, and a little bit about me, and John gave me an intro, but as a founding partner in Ascentum, my roots are in social policy and technology and how they intersect. So it's been more than a decade now of being involved in public participation initiatives, and the other thing that I'm kind of excited about, because my worlds are colliding, my gadget addiction and some of the things that we're able to do now with social media, and I'll get into some of those things later in the presentation, are starting to come to play. For the longest time, we've been thinking about how can we engage people in a mobile way, and I think we have an interesting experiment that I'll share with you today in terms of how we're tackling that opportunity. The next slide, please. So what we'll try and cover today is just a little intro on what is social media, and we'll try and cover on why is it important to public participation and connect that to public health. How is it different from other means of engagement? What are some of the key elements that you need to think through and consider in using social media in this particular fashion? What are the different ways that it can complement traditional approaches? And I'll show you some examples of some initiatives and where there's been a mix, and to give you a sense of what we've done and what we've seen work in these different instances. And then if you're just at the outset and you want to get started with an initiative like this, what are some of the things you need to work through? What are some of those first steps that you need to consider as you run through this? And what we're also going to try and do, Betsy, if you can advance to the next slide, we're going to use some of the polling technology in this GoToWebinar to just get a sense of some of your perspectives, to give me so I know where you're coming from and what your level of comfort is with some of these different concepts. So I have a few polls that we've interspersed in there. So Betsy, could you run the first poll? So our option here, and you're able to click on this. I just want to get a sense of what type of social media user are you? Are you rare, weekly, daily, you're tweeting in your sleep, or you're the multi-billionaire Mark Zuckerberg after the IPO last week? So just pick one of those options, and then we'll show the results. Okay, do we have our results coming in, Betsy?
Yes. It looks like we've stopped. 28% rare occasional user, 25% weekly user, 50% daily, and 3% tweet in my sleep, and 0% Mark Zuckerberg.
Well, usually, maybe this is a post-IPO phenomena, but usually I get one or two people that say they're Mark. But that's good. So we have some new people, we have some daily users, so we have a good mix here today. So I want to then ask this next question, and this is a question where we could have lots of different variables, but what is social media to you? And you can select from this short little list of only 5 variables. We could have, ideally, 10, 15, 20 different variables, but I just want to get a sense of, at a very high level, what social media is to you. Okay, Betsy, do we want to see what the results are?
Yes, 40% distributed content creation, 68% said interactive, 23% commercial, 70% networks affiliation and professional, 66% personal. So obviously people are choosing more than one.
Yeah, yeah. Betsy was nice and let you have more than one choice there with your questions. And so when we think about what those, could you move to the next slide? When you look at the range of things here, and there are a couple of elements here beyond what we talked about, the idea of distributed content creation. So the idea that people are actually writing and self-publishing content, or even in other areas, even collaborating on content together. It's a really important distinction between social media and sort of the original internet experiences that people had. So the difference between Web 1.0 and Web 2.0 is a term that gets used a lot. The whole idea of interactivity is embedded within social media, that there is the idea that people are interacting with each other. There is a commercial component to this, and while sometimes it can be a little bit misleading with the free nature of things. I'm having a little bit of a sound issue. Betsy, am I still coming through clear?
Yes, you sound clear here.
Okay. There is a commercial element to it, so while there's a free nature to it, it's free for a reason or free with conditions, and some of those conditions might be advertising or other things like that. The networks and affiliations, I think, whether that's LinkedIn or taking your personal or professional networks and being able to make those linkages through social media, I think people are seeing that idea. So that's tied to that next one of making the connection between personal and professional. And you know, for a while there wasn't always an opportunity to make a distinction between the two. I think some people had to lump in all of their professional and personal connections through things like Facebook, and then along came a social network called LinkedIn that it was much more professional oriented and allowed people to make that distinction. I think we'll see more of that where there's that separation and specification around the different intents and purposes of different social media. I think what we've seen over the last few years, and I think we'll continue to see, is that it's rapidly evolving. That you know, even the interface that and people complain about this all the time, but the interface of Facebook and how that's changed from 2 years ago or 3 years ago and what we have today is there, but also new social networks are coming into play and becoming more popular with each and every day, and we'll talk about some of those ones to keep your eye on in terms of how they might apply to your work in public health. The idea of it being anytime, everywhere, I mean, I think that many people may look at that as also a pro and a con, that while you can access it anywhere, that there's this continuous ability for you to be contacted and reached. And then there are those other elements that can make social media different, or how you would define it from your own perspective. If we move to the next slide, please, Betsy. So I'm going to throw out a couple of resources and ideas and a couple of places that I think you should have a look at. One of the really interesting things that was done by your federal government, this site that was developed and is still around, called apps.gov. And it's really a great collection of social media resources and things for you to consider that have all been vetted by the Government Service Agency for sort of their applicability in use for reaching out to or involving the public. Some are better than others. Some are ones that you'll be familiar with. Some you may not be all that familiar with. But they've pre-qualified all of those apps for use for government agencies, and in terms of if you're looking at you have a specific need or a specific issue or challenge that you're dealing with, and you want to get a good baseline of tools and approaches that you want to consider, then I would highly encourage you to look at apps.gov. And can you go to the next slide, please, Betsy? And so within there is software for blogs, there's photo map and data, there's document sharing and collaboration, there's idea software, there's discussion tools, there's RSS tools, and it's a little, for those of you that aren't familiar with that, it stands for really simple syndication, and that allows you to subscribe to a page and then receive updates when that page changes. It's not, it doesn't have wide adoption, but for many people, there's a big enough user group with that. Then there's the social networks, and then there's the video, photo and audio sharing, and then wikis. What's really interesting about wikis, it's funny how things come into fashion, and probably 3 or 4 years ago, there wouldn't be a week where I wouldn't get a request from a client for a wiki in terms of a tool that they'd like to use. And it's an example of the shiny new tool coming into vogue that didn't really have a proper place for what the specific needs were for the public consultation and the public participation. It was more of the fact that it was popular and new that people had interest in it in comparison to what its function would be or how it could be utilized effectively in a public engagement, public participation perspective. If we go to the next slide. And so really what I'll focus on today are the big three, and there are thousands of social media apps. And someone just sent me a new picture today, and maybe I could send it to Betsy and John after, and they could distribute it or put it up on the website. But there are these social media universe maps that can show you and categorize them in their different functions. And there are thousands of them now, and after a while, things start to evolve here. But if you're from an organizational perspective, and if you're just getting started, or you want to sort of invest some time in social media in terms of doing public participation, then really it's Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube that should be the starting points for investigation. Can you move to the next slide, please? Two that you may want to also have a look at, and these are examples of social media evolving. You find in many organizations that, and we've seen it, that Facebook may be blocked internally, that you're not able to access that. Because there's a public and anyone can join type of perspective, and sometimes internal conversations on that are not what organizations want. But when you look at something like Yammer, which for all intents and purposes is an organization-only Facebook, it's a very effective tool. We use it even within our organization for sharing information and commenting and having internal discussions. And it's limited based on the fact that you have access to an email account. So if you were at Ascentum and you had an Ascentum.com website, then you would be able to access our Yammer feed, but only if you had access, only if you had an email account. And then we're able to have some work conversations, and very similar to Facebook, but within a private network experience. And many organizations don't even know that they have Yammer communities established, and so it's something that you can check out and see if one exists with your email address. Pinterest is another really interesting social media phenomenon, and I don't think people have completely figured out yet in terms of how it may work in different environments. But really the concept there is people pinning, like having their own bulletin board or pin board of visual things that they're interested in and that they've come across around the web. And what you're able to create are your own pin boards and share those with other people and other users. So there would be an opportunity from a public health perspective to take some information or some infographics or some scary anti-tobacco ads or things like that, and be able to flag and share those, and people have the ability to stumble across those and share those and tag them and put them on their own pin boards. It's a really interesting phenomena, and now has become, by certain metrics, one of the fastest growing social networks out there today. And also from a personal perspective, there are some neat things that you can do, crafts and hobbies and things like that. It doesn't have to be all work. Why don't we move on to the next page? Okay, so we have another polling question here. Why is it important to public participation? So we have a few variables here. We have low cost, too big to ignore, great for outreach, essential for information, or new means of engagement. Okay, Betsy, do you want to share the results?
Yes, just 1 second here. I'm just going to read it from the top down. For some reason, it doesn't seem to save the single choice only. The new means of engagement and great for outreach seem to be the two most important reasons for social media, followed by low cost, too big to ignore, and essential for information.
Okay, so great for outreach and new means of engagement. Now the interesting thing there, if we want to close this and go back to the slides, go to our next one. When the whole idea of great for outreach and new means of engagement, I mean, they are fantastic for that, and I'll give you some anecdotal information and some case studies around that as we move through the presentation. One of the hooks that people have, especially from an organizational perspective, because many of these services are, are free to join, they're not free to operate, and that's a misconception, or there isn't always an understanding of what that actually means to operate and run your social media presences on an ongoing basis. So when we look at that too big to ignore piece, and we look at some of the Facebook demographics, so at 157 million people in the U.S., that's the total user base of accounts that are operating in the U.S. today. Those are active accounts, so they actually create a metric for that. And of that, it is slightly more female than male, but but close enough in terms of participation there. But you're looking at a very significant number broadly across the U.S. in terms of uptake. Can you go to the next slide, please? And so when we look at specifically in Washington State, you're looking at a number of 4.4 million. So when I looked at your census information from 2011, that's about 65% of the state population has active Facebook accounts. Now that isn't 100%, but it is a significant majority of the population are reachable through the social networks, and Facebook in particular. Some of the other things are networks are a little bit harder to understand. So Twitter, you don't always get a sense because you don't have a profile per se or the same type of profile that you have on Facebook. Getting some of those demographic details is a little bit more difficult. To get demographics on Facebook, you just have to pretend you want to buy an ad, and you can get all the most recent data is at your disposal. Could you move to the next slide, please, Betsy? So the question you have to ask is, what does it mean to your organization if you're not reaching 4.4 million people in the preferred social network? And I think that answer is different for different organizations and specifically the people that you're trying to reach. But it is a significant proportion of the population today. So go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I've talked a little bit about some of the social networks and some of the rationale for considering them and in some of those arguments there. Now I'm just going to give a little bit of a theory interlude in terms of how they can be utilized and how they can be used from a public participation perspective, or to help inform decision-making within organizations. And we'll go to the next slide, Betsy. So one of my favorite ways of thinking about public participation in general, and social media is just one route by which we can engage people, but is thinking about where you are in your decision-making process, or where you are, and in public health this can be when you're social marketing and things like that are a little bit different, but in public health in particular, this helps in terms of defining and addressing certain issues. And we use this model with the Public Health Agency of Canada, and refined it a little bit for them. But fundamentally, you're looking at, with every issue, you're defining the issue, you have to gather some data, you're going to set some decision-making criteria, you're going to develop alternatives, you're going to evaluate those alternatives, you're going to make a decision, you're going to implement a decision, and you're going to evaluate a decision. And whether or not you know this, you go through this same decision-making cycle many times in a day, whether it's deciding what you're going to wear in the morning or ordering your lunch. You actually do this as part, it's a natural way of problem solving. But when you think about this decision-making life cycle, you want to understand whether you're going to be taking data in from different sources or capturing different perspectives to help inform each your thinking, each step along this decision-making life cycle. So at the beginning, you may be speaking with key scientists, or looking at a specific issue. If I take H1N1 was an issue that I was really highly involved with in vaccine prioritization because of shortages in supply. When we were defining the issue and looking at some of the challenges, we had the best scientists working and taking the best science together from all of our different provinces with this pandemic vaccine task group, and we were defining the issue and gathering as much data as possible. And then we had to determine and establish some criteria on how we were going to prioritize the vaccine distribution because of the shortages at that time. And so there were certain criteria established and understanding either what the data and the science had been telling us in terms of particular populations that were at risk, and things that were known and things that were still had big question marks beside it. And then there were some alternatives that were developed in terms of what that prioritization sequence would be. And we actually went out to the public and had a random sample of 2,000 Canadians evaluate the alternatives using a process called a choice book, where they had to consider different perspectives and different trade-offs in terms of what that prioritization was. And so we captured the citizen perspectives and combined that with the scientific data, and also combined it with industry, an industry working group that was established in terms of providing different perspectives from some of the largest organizations in the country, and combine that with the vaccine supply information that was provided to ultimately create the first vaccine prioritization list. And so that's an example of where technology was utilized, and it was an online process that was used to capture citizen perspectives to help evaluate alternatives at that time. And that's where it was determined to be the most effective sequence of involving people using technology. So that was a bit of a long example there, but can we go to the next slide? For those of you that are interested in getting more information on some of the best practices in public participation, the IAP2, which is the International Association for Public Participation, they have a very large U.S. community that I would encourage you to check out their website, iap2.org. They have a great training, great resources available. They also hold outstanding conferences where you can get more information. And this is one of their key resources, and they make the difference between different types of engagement, from inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. I think you'll see some connections to your public health work and that continuum in terms of engaging the public. And then you can see at the bottom there's different promises that you're making right in that mid-band, and then there's example techniques that you might be using along that spectrum. So it's that idea that public participation starts with information all up to collaboration and empowerment. Can we move to the next slide, please? So also from a theoretical perspective, if you are engaging the public and you are asking them to make a contribution, and it's not just for information purposes, and you're actually capturing data, then you need to consider what your intent is. And usually it sort of falls into 3 different categories. And one is on the left, we have the suggest and explore, where people are making suggestions, sharing ideas, exploring an issue, sort of that broad, open, brainstorming type of conversation. So trying to generate, or a generative conversation. In the middle would be a type of conversation where you need to validate or test something. So you may have an idea that you want people to review or consider and provide feedback on that. That might be one of the other intents that you have. And then another might be to make choices or to reconcile between choices. And there's where you get in sort of the deliberative type of conversation, where people have to sometimes make tough choices with limited resources. So can we move into the next slide, please? And then when we look at social media and how that's connected to those 3 concepts of explore and inform and providing feedback, is the opportunity to provide them information, to invite exploration, to help close that feedback loop, and to really engage. And now, we're going to go through some examples that are going to illustrate that. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and this is another H1N1 example that so during when we were in the middle, it was the second wave of the outbreak, which was the fall. I'm losing track of my years now, but I want to say it was 2009 or 2010, I can't remember now. But anyway, we created within Facebook an H1N1 info center for the Public Health Agency of Canada. And really it was to allow people to have access to information in a variety of different ways, but also take advantage of social networks to share that information so that we could combat some of the myths associated with H1N1 and the vaccine in particular. So if you could you go to the next slide, Betsy. So really what there's a couple of things that I can explain here in this participation interface. So one of the things, you can't do it as easily now in Facebook, but you can create these little badges. And so did you get the H1N1 vaccine? Tell your friends why. When people clicked on that, they could enter in information on why they got the vaccine and why they wanted to share that with their friends. And then that would appear in their Facebook feed, and they would let people know about why they decided to get it, and create more exposure to it. So the other pieces that we have here are three different things, or there's two. There are fact books and quiz books. So fact books were, and we'll go through an example of them, is just a short series of slides that just gave people facts on certain issues. So what do you do? What are some of the facts that you need to consider in this instance for caring for someone who's sick? And then the next one was a quiz book on getting the dirt on clean hands. So what is effective hand washing? And it's really, I mean, I'm sure these are things that you deal with on a regular basis, but it's unbelievable just to understand how little people understand about hand washing and and getting the proper information out, or the best information out on the best means and for how long, and the difference between hand sanitizers and soap and water and things like that. And then there's another example there of the fact book on what the actual H1N1 virus is. And so the people had the ability to, can you go to the next slide, please, Betsy? So this fact book here is an example of one that was specifically for mothers, pregnancy and H1N1, and things that people needed to know about that. They could go through that fact book, and could you go to the next slide now, Betsy? Or they could go through a quiz book, learning about hands. This is hand washing, and I think some facts around that. If we move to the next slide, please, Betsy. When they completed that, the really neat part of it was that they could pick specific people with that they wanted to share that with from their friend list. So they could complete that fact book, they could complete that quiz book, and then share it with people that they thought might be interested in it as well. So it had an information and mild engagement component to it, but it also had a viral sharing component that allowed that information to get out to people through the social network. Can I go to the next one? Okay, so I think we have time for our next poll, which is on what makes it different. So you have a few options here. Is it because it's segmented? Is it because it's free? Is it because it's popular? Is it because it's bursty? Or is it because it has a short half-life? Some of these you may not exactly. I'll explain them after what they all mean. But let's see what your responses are to these. Okay, Betsy, do you want to give us a sense of what people are thinking here?
Yes, the top choice is popular, followed by free, segmented, bursty, and short half-life.
Okay. So could you go to the next slide? So when we look at all of our options here,
Joe, may I interrupt really quickly? We just had a question come in about the fact books and quiz books that were created on Facebook, and it's how do you create something like this?
Yeah, so the neat thing about that, what we created was a specialized app. Facebook allows you to have normal pages or within a specific, you can create sub pages within your page. It sounds very confusing. But another thing that you can do is have apps associated with your page. And so we have an app, this Info Center app that we created within Facebook that allows you to just create an info center and be able to send out that information. So if people are interested in that, you can send me an email and I could tell you more about that. But it's just there's a couple of components. One, there is the technical app, and then there is the content development that would go into the quiz books and fact books and things like that. So what the really neat thing is that you're engaging people right from your page, and they're not leaving the social network. And I think many people are finding that people are reluctant to leave Facebook now to do outside things. I think that's one challenges that people have is when they're either clicking on ads or leaving, that they don't necessarily want to do that as much anymore. And there actually was some pretty big controversy. I think some of you may have heard last week GM cut a lot of their Facebook ads because people aren't interested in it. So embedding things within your Facebook page is one of the real routes to go there, and that's what you can do with the app. Okay, so in terms of what makes things different between social media and other engagement channels is your ability to segment things. So you're able to understand your audiences, to be able to reach them through different messages. In Facebook, you have great demographic details in terms of understanding who's engaging with you. There is that free component, but as I mentioned earlier, it's not always free. It's not free to operate. It's free to sign up and start, but to keep things running takes people power. The idea of it being shiny and popular is important, but now we're looking at things that are really well established. So the numbers of people on Facebook and the number of people with Twitter accounts they're becoming more mature now. But something like Pinterest is an example of that new shiny social network that's coming out. Bursty. So one of the challenges with social networks is the frequency of communication. The frequency in which you're going to be sending out information, and the frequency with engagement with people that are engaging with you. And because there's so much information going out there, you have to be able to ensure that you're getting beyond some of the noise that some of these channels have. I think it definitely is not a substitute for other engagement, but it is only a complement. And so making, if you had to choose between clinics and social media, it's not even a question, but it is a complement to those types of things. One of the other elements of it is the short half-life, and what we mean by that is someone calculated that the half-life of the tweet is somewhere around 2 or 3 hours, and after that tweet goes out, it doesn't exist anymore. It pretty much becomes dead. So you have to think about just how short-term some of these communications are, that they don't last. And so when you combine that with your frequency or your burstiness, you have to think about those elements there. And dedication, so there really needs to be a minimal level of effort, and you have to think of it like a garden. That you have to spend some time cultivating the land and planting the seeds and pulling out the weeds before the flowers or vegetables or fruits are going to blossom for you. So you need to spend some time and really continue that dedicated effort. And by dedicated, it doesn't mean someone all time, all day, but there has to be some commitment to rolling through things. Experimentation is a key thing. There are lots of really great case studies, so experimentation is not as important anymore. There are really neat things that can be done depending on who your audiences are. There are best practices that you can take from other organizations, but they always need to be contextualized within your specific needs. And so there always will be a need for some experimentation, but it's not like the wheel is there; it doesn't need to be rebuilt. And that there's going to continue to be an evolution. That what we know today, we can guarantee you that a year from now it's going to be different. Just will. There'll be a new interface. There'll be a new plugin. There'll be a new type of app that you might be interested in. Maybe be considering more mobile, who knows, but it will evolve, and there will be new things that come up, and that's what makes things different. I think that we're going to move into another example, and I'm going to keep rolling here. Here's a little quote from Ellis, and he's our director of project innovation here, and he looks at it between you have the ability within Twitter to access a community of thought leaders. You have the ability to reach innovators or reach people that have big social networks of their own. And by sometimes reaching out to them, they can disseminate information to their followers or their friends or their fans and get that word out in different ways. And by making an appeal to them, you can have some great success. And so whether that are, in your context, that might be political figures or local community leaders, or maybe it could be athletes or celebrities talking to people about, different, that would be willing to retweet out some important public health information for people to consider because you'd had a chat with them. So it's the ability within Twitter, not necessarily, you can establish your own relationship and your own presence, but you also can see what you can do in terms of leveraging those that have a larger presence there. Next slide, please. So when we look at what are some of the motivators for participation, we've found in the past that that those that have a personal stake or interest in that, generally people will get involved in issues that they're interested in or could be personally affected by. As public health practitioners, you actually have an element of trust already in the relationship, but the people need to trust that and have a sense of trust in terms of whom they're communicating with. And then in terms of impact, I want to understand, now this may not always be the case with all public, with public participation, remember we have that spectrum from inform to empower. There's people think that there will be different impact in terms of how you're actually engaging them. So it's just on inform, they probably aren't too worried about what the impact of it would be. But if you're engaging with them on a significant basis and they're contributing to the development of your plans, they need to understand that their input and perspective is not just going to a big hole, a black hole. Okay, let's move on to the next, please.
Joe, this is Betsy. We had a question come in.
Sure.
It is, I resist social media because it feels endless and exhaustive. Is there a prioritization for level of involvement that is most effective?
It's a very, very tricky question to ask. And from a personal, I think there are two ways to look at it, from an organizational perspective and from a personal perspective. I think from an organizational perspective, we're getting to the point now, ignoring it is kind of like not having a phone number anymore. It needs to be considered, and for some people that might be, unfortunately, but it needs to be considered as another channel for engagement. So and relationships. So telephone's important, social media is important, your in-person work is probably at the forefront there, but it is really important. Now, prioritization, there are so many things that you can do in terms of social media, and that's why when people or organizations are just thinking through it for the outset, we work with them to establish what their standards and norms are and what their tools and approaches will be, and we try and have a real focus and limit. Many people want to just keep on trying the newest thing, but in the short term, just by focusing on Facebook and Twitter, that is one of those ways where you can sort of limit things to your starting point. Now, what is the frequency? If I think of what the minimum frequency, probably from an organizational perspective, with Facebook, you're looking at a post or two per day, and from an organizational perspective, for Twitter, you're looking at a few tweets a day, 2 or 3. The ability for both of these to be done in a way that allows you to present information that you already have. You already have all your information, you already have your brochures, you already have all those facts, you already have those messages on different public health issues. There's no shortage of content. I don't think any of you can say that you have a shortage of content in terms of propaganda at your disposal. It's just a means of repackaging that and getting that information out through social networks. And I think some people will say that broadcast is not good enough for social media, but broadcast is better than nothing, I argue. And if you don't have time to do that engagement, but you do have that ability to broadcast, that is a very important function and feature in social media, and you have that opportunity to do that, and you also have that opportunity with all of that content and information that you have at your disposal. So I think there are ways that you can prioritize. There are ways that you can look for content to go out and to spread it out, and there's no harm in repeating it. If you had content that you repeated important things, remember, a tweet only lasts 2 or 3 hours, so if you retweeted something a couple weeks from then at a different time, then there'd be nothing wrong in doing that. Maybe the same message, the only message being sent out, might be frustrating for people and turn people off, but you can actually re-emphasize things. One little tip for you, some of these stats have shown that the best time to send out information and the best time for people to consume information is at lunch. So during the noon hour, if you release your things, or send out your messages around 12, that's the time that people consume the most information. Okay, let me move on to the next slide, because I think I'm starting to run short on time here. But Speak Up for Change was one of our first experiments with Facebook, and it was a project that we did with our largest national newspaper. It's called the Globe and Mail. It's sort of like the Canadian equivalent of the New York Times. And we worked with them in a small youth organization called Apathy is Boring. I love their name. They're a fantastic organization for youth engagement. But what we have here is an energy issue, and this is using our deliberative choice book approach. A choice book is really like kind of like a survey, but what you're doing is presenting evidence and considerations for people to think about before you ask them any questions. So if you go to the next slide, Betsy. So people have a chance to, could you go to the next slide too, please? So they have a chance to think, consume information, and the neat thing about this is this had some animation and an audio voiceover that was reading out everything to people, so they could either read it themselves, they could listen to a narrator, go through the issues, and consume the information in different ways. Could you go to the next slide, please? So people learn about the issues, and then they consider trade-offs, consider scenarios, consider different options, and then have a chance to respond to questions only after they've consumed and considered some different information. We work really hard on presenting things in a balanced way, and so that people can trade off the pros and cons of different issues. Can you go to the next slide, please? And then once again, working in that whole concept of being able to tell other people about it once they've done that process. So that was one of our first experiments, our first app that we created for Facebook to allow for engagement on public issues. And this one was specifically on energy. And you know what? I can send out a link to Betsy and John after, and they can send that out to you, and you can try this one out in particular. We have it up on our demonstration site, so you can see how that works. Could you go to the next slide, please? The other thing that and this is a little bit different now, but you can actually target ads. They're very low cost, and if you have a good ad and it's an issue that's important to people, then it can work. But you can also segment ads based on age, demographic, location, state, city. It's the ability for you to sort of target your ad to a specific demographic. That's one of the really, really powerful things about Facebook. There's some arguments on its utility, and GM last week shot a nuclear missile at Facebook saying they weren't happy with what they were getting, but who knows what the backstory is there. But there is from our perspective, we've had a lot of success and utility in using ads on public health issues to get people engaged in our activities. Go to the next one, please. And Betsy, how much time do we have still, just so that I know? Okay, I'm going to keep going until she cuts me off then. So could you go to the next slide, please?
Joe, this is John. We have until 1:30.
Okay, so I do have a little bit more time until I just open it to questions. This is an initiative that we did on childhood obesity. It was a national initiative, so I know I know how difficult you can imagine getting the federal government to do something, but to get, say, all of our provinces, equivalent to your states, involved in any issue is extremely difficult. But this was something that everybody got on board on. So this is a national dialogue supported by all the provinces and territories and the federal government on childhood obesity, and it was about healthy weights and identifying multi-sectoral solutions to some of the challenges around childhood obesity. It was a fantastic initiative in the sense that we used a variety of different mechanisms. We used in-person dialogues. We held 25 across the country. We used this online website to allow people to share their ideas and to comment on their ideas. We allowed the website as well for organizations or individuals, but primarily organizations that wanted to make a formal submission on what they thought should be done could do that as well through this website. And then through Facebook, we embedded this entire process within Facebook so people could participate using their Facebook accounts and rate in the social network. Could you go to the next slide, please? And people could make their contributions and contribute their ideas right within there. And so it all went to a single database, whether someone participated on the website or participated in Facebook, their ideas and contributions could all go there. It was a really neat mix of approaches. I can also send out maybe a link. I better keep track of all the links I'm telling you that I'm going to send, but I can send that out to John and Betsy on the final report on this if you want to get a sense of how that process worked and what some of the outcomes were. Because as we have the issue of childhood obesity is not one just that's a challenge in Canada, but it's also one that I know is a significant challenge in the U.S. as well. Could you go to the next slide, please? Oh, and there was also...
Joe, I'm interrupt for just a second. I see that according to our information that we sent out, that we're anticipating this particular webinar just going from 12 until 1. Sometimes we run for 90 minutes, but I'm looking at my invitation, and I think people are expecting the webinar to close soon. So,
oh, okay. Then maybe what I'll do is I'll just wrap things up. You're going to have access to the full presentation, but maybe if you could just quickly run through, Betsy, I'll just show one other thing. Keep going till not Citizen Compass. Keep going, keep going, keep going. This one. So this, I think, is a new frontier for engagement. This one is the ability for people to engage them on their mobile, get them to watch a short video, answer some questions, and then find out more if they want. And we're excited about this opportunity of engaging people in the large, now that there's a much larger penetration of smartphone adoption within our communities. So that'll be maybe the last thing I'll leave you with. But if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them now, or if there are other things, you can also email me at your convenience. I think my contact information is at the end.
We did just have one question come in, which is, what is your take on QR scan codes?
QR scans are really interesting in being able to provide people with additional information or access to information. I think there have been some really good implementations of it, and there have been really poor implementations of it. The best thing is that you're able to get metrics, so you'll know right away if it's working or not. You're able to tell if people are accessing it or using it. I think in the future that QR codes will, they're already a dinosaur. There'll be most phones in the next 12 to 18 months that come out are going to have something called a little chip inside them, which is going to be called near field communications. And instead of actually having to open up a QR scanner, you're going to just be able to swipe your phone by a near field communication tag, and it will get all the information automatically. You won't have to scan anything. So I think while QR codes can work and certain people will get information, but I would say that that they have a definite life cycle, and will probably, not that I have my own crystal ball here, but I would say they probably have maybe a 24 to 36-month life cycle left on them.
Okay, another question is, can you give examples of using these techniques with low-income or other racial and ethnic groups?
Yeah, it's interesting. The prevalence of technology adoption is, there are some people that are not online, and usually it's the elderly are the highest in terms of non-users. Low income, there's still a fairly, whether people are accessing it in schools or in other locations like libraries and things like that, there still is access. What I also found was interesting is smartphone adoption in the U.S. I just saw a stat last week. Smartphone adoption is less for people of white ethnicity than it is for Asian or African American, which was a surprise to me to hear that. It was highest amongst Asians, second among African American, and then third with those of white ethnicity. So it's there. While it is, there's no 100% accessible process for everyone. That's why there needs to be a mix. There will always be a mix. There'll always have to be a complementary approach. But there is a significant proportion of your population that is available and reachable using these techniques at a relatively low cost. And when you really think about it in terms of being able to get out to people. So I would say that there are some shortcomings. There are some different communities that are not as online as others. I was talking to John about this earlier. One of the misconceptions that some people have here in Canada is that the Inuit in the north, because they have horrible internet connections, like the dial-up speeds that we used to have in the late 90s, that they don't use social media. Well, their Facebook adoption is almost 100%. And it's elders and different people that are telling information on where caribou are moving, where whales are being sighted, where polar bears are, how their fishing trip went, showing pictures and things like that. They don't really know that it can be done at high speed. They just know that the speed they have is the speed the internet is, and the internet and Facebook adoption in sort of the most rural and remote communities, in I would say in Canada, but maybe even in the world, are using technology to connect with each other. So it's not perfect, but there is a significant population base across all demographics in terms of the use of the technology.
Okay, Joe, I think that's about as much time as we have for today. I really appreciate, once again, your coming and making this presentation available to us. And as Betsy pointed out, it's recorded along with your presentation. And really greatly appreciated. And my apologies for the miscommunication about 1:30. It would have tried to help us stay on track a little better. I want to let you know that we have another webinar coming up on June 6th and invite you to come with us. It'll start at noon on Wednesday, June 6th. And it's called Community Benefit Legislation. It's co-sponsored by WSPHA and WSALFO, and it will address the new community benefit requirements for nonprofit hospitals that's set forth in the Affordable Care Act, as well as the Washington's new state law written by Representative Lori Jenkins. It directs nonprofit hospitals to collaborate with local public health jurisdictions. And the topics that will be covered include the federal community benefit requirements, Washington State's new law, activities that are going on like this in other states, and how working with hospitals and local collaboratives will benefit the community. So I certainly hope that you will join us. Thanks again for attending, and especially appreciative for those of you who stayed longer than you anticipated doing so. So thanks to all. Enjoy the rest of your day.